Welcome to Organizational Sherlocks, the podcast where business meets psychology and your organizational puzzles meet their match.
Join us for captivating stories and practical solutions to unravel your toughest challenges.
I'm Dr. Elizabeth Fleming.
And I'm Morgan Ashworth, your guides to a prescription for business success.
Let's dive in.
How you doing today, Elizabeth?
Doing all right. How about you?
Doing good. Still giggling from our conversation before we started.
Yeah, I know. I could tell in the intro that you were laughing a little bit, but that's good. You know what? A little bit of humor is good in the day, right?
Yeah. So it's Elizabeth and I have very different weather patterns right now, so starting
Sure
off a very
do.
conversation. But anyway, speaking of different weather patterns, I feel like depending on your career track, you might have different patterns for how your career, exceeds itself, meaning, how you move up and if you move up. And so that's kind of what we're going to talk about today. I know we talked with Megan a little bit about, HR in general, coaching, things along those lines. You start in one position and you work there a year to train to take on a management or other higher position, and then you work in the higher position for a year, and then you work another year and train the person that's going to succeed you. So I think we're going to be talking about mentorship and succession planning today.
Yeah, I think it's interesting because I work a lot in the succession planning space, right? Like a lot of clients that I work with call and they say, I'm planning to retire and I need to figure out, who's going to kind of, again, succeed, or come after, as well as like, what do I do? How do I do that, right? And I feel like, at least in my experience, and I'd be curious to know yours too, Morgan, I don't often hear succession planning and mentorship being used in the same sentence. It's almost like it's a missing piece that I think it's so important and so vital, and yet it's not something that people really kind of put together as concepts that are interrelated.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree with you. I feel like too often, an owner of a company is like, I need to retire at some point in time, or a manager, I need to retire at some point in time, and I don't have anyone to take my place. And then they just expect someone to kind of get hired and take the place. Well, just like you need to train a new hire, you need to train whoever's going to take your place. And part of that is also training your mindset and something along those lines, which is more of the mentorship role than training, development versus training, as we've talked about.
Yeah, I think that's totally fair. I mean, I think succession planning, again, like just to put another spin on it a little bit, is, usually when we think about succession planning, we think about CEOs, we think about, kind of executives in that C-suite, but succession planning exists throughout the whole entire organization.
Yes.
And I think that's an important part to think about too. But yeah, I mean, yes, I guess let's just take, for example, a CEO that's going to retire. Once they identify someone, or maybe a couple of people that could potentially get, up to speed and into that role, I think it's less about, at least in my experience, it's less about teaching them how to be an executive often, and more about knowledge sharing and how can we help you, walk into the role and kind of have a vision for the future and be able to implement that in a really solid way, to see the most success. So I think that it is both, and don't get me wrong. Like, I know that there's pieces that maybe they don't have experience with and they need to have that training. But it's a lot of times that knowledge sharing, which I think is where mentorship is so important. My last point on that is I think it's not like you can say, hey, Morgan, you're going to be the next CEO. Let's send you to a training course and you're going to learn how to be a CEO. It doesn't work like that, because every company is unique.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny that you bring that up because, I am in a company right now that I'm supposed to be CEO at some point in time for. Currently, I'm CPO, Chief People Officer, but I'm kind of dual acting as COO, Operations Officer, small company. And titles in general, just they apply to companies in different ways, or your roles can be a little different. But anyway, so funny enough, like I got into this role. I've been in my role, well, not my current role, but I've been at the company for 4 or 5 years now. And I came onto the company purposely knowing that I was going to be CEO one day. And we have another person also at the company who has the capability to be CEO one day. So for example, if I'm not ready to take that CEO executive role because this individual's already been a CEO in his past. He could be, but then
Right.
on top of that, I also have someone that I could work with, someone I'm going to be able to depend on when I'm CEO that has the same level of experience. So funny enough, I feel like I'm a great example there,
Yeah.
but I don't want to talk about myself in that scenario because I'm working with people succession planning constantly as well. I mean, I think of, I have a supervisor, actually two supervisors who are going to be retiring in the next couple of years. One probably sooner than the other. And we need to find someone who could be quote unquote just her, not her
Right.
replacement necessarily, but her.
Right.
So the knowledge sharing of, this is how I handle these situations and this is what I want to do and these are my values and this is how I think more than this is how I do my job.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. I think that's totally fair. I mean, I think it's, in my mind, when I think about mentorship, particularly in this space, it's kind of the like walk the path with me. I need to make this decision, or I'm considering this change or this new implementation or whatever it is. And so rather than it just being kind of, that person, thinking through things in a silo by themselves, it's, mentorship really is about, I'm going to use you, I guess, again, as an example, but like, hey, Morgan, we need to make this decision, like come and walk this journey, be on this journey with me. And that's part of mentorship, is just kind of showing, how am I thinking about it? And then also being able to throw out there, what has worked in the past? What
Mhm.
hasn't worked? What have we tried? Maybe what haven't we tried? And then asking the person too, what are your thoughts? And kind of giving those kind of practical and applicable opportunities to learn.
And I think,
And
yeah, I think on top of that also is, you know, I'm going to do things differently than my current CEO. I will. Yes, we're gonna have same mindsets in the sense of goals and values probably,
sure.
but our styles might be a little different. And that's okay, but it's also about me teaching this person my style so that we can ensure that the workflow that I need to complete with my style matches their style in the sense of completion of work,
Mhm.
if that makes any sense. I'm not going to be Dan, our CEO, perfectly. I won't be because I'm me. I'm Morgan.
Mhm.
I can't be another person because then I would just
Right.
lose who I am. It's that authenticity. And so sometimes it's saying, we might be a little different in this way, but thanks to those differences, this might be a way I'll lead better, or this might be something I need to work on within my leadership as a CEO someday. I
Absolutely.
know, like, we have two owners, so the CEO and the CFO actually. And so the CFO a few weeks ago, actually, because I'm going to be involved with needing to look at bills and whatnot, which I've
Sure.
already been very aware of. They pass things to me every so often saying, "Can you just audit these for me?" And it's just little things that you wouldn't think that you would have to do, but you have to do because running a company, there is a lot of administrative work to it as well. And so I actually was sitting in while our CFO was doing, we had our, extended corporate taxes. So I was looking at that with her and sitting in just while she was doing the work. And she's kind of just explaining what she's doing. But I'm also sitting there working, getting some of my administrative work done as a CPO.
Right.
Um, and so kind of just observation and learning in a not so solidified mentorship, um, I guess, meeting sense.
Right.
Having
Right.
those micro learnings is very helpful. Having just quick conversations with your mentor, rather than, okay, you meet and you have this meeting and that's mentorship. Then you meet and you have this meeting and that's mentorship. Sometimes it's, here's a text here, here's a little email, or here's a quick conversation. It doesn't always have to be super formalized
Right.
in a sense.
Right. Yeah. You don't have to sit down and say, every Thursday at 9 a.m., we're going to sit down and we're going to go through and do mentorship, right? Like, it doesn't have to be that way. Like what you said about micro learnings. It's a good way to think about it, because the more time you offer yourself and, again, whoever is coming next, the more time you offer for those micro learnings, I really believe the better off you are. I have clients that will call sometimes and they'll say, well, our CEO is retiring in, 4 months and we need to identify the next CEO. And I'm like, whoa, okay, we should have maybe started talking about this 2-3 years ago, right?
Yeah,
Because
it
it
takes
takes time.
years, not months.
Yeah. And so, like, I guess that's my biggest, push to any business owners that are out there, or HR individuals too who are involved in kind of that succession planning space is give it time, you know, because it does take time. And two, and I mean, not to be like a downer or anything, but sometimes you have someone identified and that you think they're the next person and they're either not interested, maybe they're not ready, right? And so you have to make a decision, you know, so I think there's definitely a lot to look at. And I will say, I think that's part of the rise in interest in kind of high potential development in organizations, is because if they engage in high potential development, they can identify folks earlier, and help to get them in the right seats, you know, when they need them.
I think also identifying is like, most people will first try to identify someone internally, but for a lot of larger corporations, you tend to actually identify someone externally. Like when you have a board, they're trying to find someone externally. I mean, I've heard disaster stories when that happens too, is because, you know, they had a crunch time for succession planning. And so when they looked externally, they didn't find, you know, the prime candidate, or the prime candidate wasn't brought on to work underneath the current CEO or retiring CEO. And it just creates this gap. You know, you can't have one CEO leave and have one CEO start usually, unless you have that board that's being the mentors for
the oversight.
Yeah, exactly. It's hard to just automatically do it. And then one other thing I want to mention is, if you're choosing someone internally, you're usually choosing someone that's already a manager. So now you have to succession plan for the manager to have somebody underneath them. And then if that's a supervisor, someone underneath them, you know, hierarchies move. So if one person's getting promoted and another person needs to get promoted from there, you know, there's levels where multiple people could get promoted at once. And so you need to plan for that overall succession. Like right now, for example, I have someone going through leadership development mentorship with an external coach that I've assigned them with. It's only a few, it's like 6 meetings they're going to have, but plus, you know, small conversations here and there, like we talked about. But I told her, I'm like, hey, I'm here if you want to continue talking about, if there's something like immediately you want to talk about within the workplace, I'm happy to help. Obviously, you can keep your external coach, if you want to keep it all confidential, fine, because it's supposed to be, you know, their personal work. But I would love to be a part of it, because this person is hopefully going to lead a department that I'm helping lead at the moment. Right? Because if I'm the CEO one day, I need someone to lead the department I'm helping lead, so that I'm not leading a department and leading a company at the same time.
Yeah. You know, that's interesting. So even you know, and our listeners probably know, because we've talked about before, but coaching is a core service that I offer in my business, right? And I find it absolutely imperative that we engage the manager of the individual, not necessarily because I'm going out and saying, oh, guess what Morgan told me? And, you know, it's not like that. So there is a level of confidentiality. Yes. Right. We want to create a safe space. And my process personally is every quarter, at least, we have a meeting where it's the coachee, myself, and their manager, and we talk about what's going well. What can we focus on? Do we need to adjust the goals? That kind of stuff. And I think that's really important, because it's not just about keeping the manager in the loop. It's also about, I feel and again, this is maybe my bias or just my view, but I also think it's my job to make sure that the manager is supporting the individual in their development. It's not just about what I'm doing with them or the work they're doing in the sessions with me. It's about how they're being supported to take those learnings and put them into practice. And so I think that's really important, you know.
I'm going to get at least a high level overview of what's going on with goals and development, you know, see where they've developed. But I definitely agree with you that I would rather know more and be more involved, probably because of who I am as a psychology professional, than less involved. Because if I know what's going on, I can help you through the day-to-day that's separate from your coach, because I am working with this person day in, day out. We might not have a major conversation every day, but we're working towards the same outcome for the company at the same time, especially with her being in the department I manage, our business ops team. So, you know, definitely I agree with you there. I think it's so important. You might have a couple coaches, a couple mentors in an organization for somebody. Like this person is a prime example. Our CFO, even though I'm CPO and I oversee business ops, our CFO is doing things with the bookkeeper, who this is. And so she's working with the CFO on certain trainings and certain mentorship. She's going to work with this coach on some more leadership development, situational awareness. But she's
Right.
also going to work with me in the sense of day-to-day conversations, day-to-day situations.
Absolutely. Yeah. No, I think that's all really good points, right? And important things just to think about. What keeps going through my mind though is like when I'm thinking about succession planning, and I actually had a conversation with my husband about this last night, which is very interesting. Like just the change management that's required when you are, planning for a departure, right? I mean, it could be retirement. It could be, an owner of the company is leaving or whatever it is, I mean, there's a lot of different ways that departures can happen from an organization, but I think that change management is so important. And like, that's an area that I don't know is always done well, right? I mean, I think there's a lot of models out there, of course, and not that this podcast is necessarily about change management. There's a lot of models, but there's not one right way to do it,
Yeah.
But the thought of, let's say, like a CEO leaving, right, or retiring or whatever it is, like you may not think necessarily that that's going to have a profound impact on the rest of the organization, but imagine an organization where the CEO has been there for 30 years and they are loved by most people in the organization and they are really inspirational and all of that. Like that's going to be hard for a lot of people in the organization. And so you have to have a plan for what that's going to look like. And again, that plan can't start a month before they leave. It has to start before that.
Yeah, I mean, it might take more than a year even. I mean, I
Yeah.
like how you say like there's all these models for change management. That's great. Just like we've talked about, there's all these blueprints for methods and for interventions or change management in a company, whether that be succession planning, change management, or change management in the sense of adding a reward system or adding a bonus system, things along those lines. There's some smaller versions of it as well. So there's all
Mhm.
these blueprints, but it needs to be specialized to the company, to the organization, and to the people at the organization, to the stakeholders, right? Because the model might work in a general sense, but does it work for the organization? Is it applied to the setup of that organization?
Mhm. Well, and I think too that I think the danger in using a model alone, right? I'm not suggesting that people don't use a model. I mean, there's a lot of great ones out there, don't get me wrong. And ones that, I've used and know a lot about. But by using just a model and applying a model, you're not considering all the contextual factors or the human factors that exist. And when you think about change, the reason we do change management is because there's people involved and change is hard and people don't like change. Like, let's be honest, I don't like change. Okay, that's not true. I love change, but only when I have some control over it.
Exactly. Control, it's not a fear of change, it's a fear of control, actually.
Yes.
That's something I do push is you don't have a fear of change, you have a fear of control over the change. I
Yeah.
tell
Like,
people that all the time.
yeah, it's funny. I mean, I'm like a proponent for change a lot of the time. So for good and for bad. But anyway, that's neither here nor there. But I do think that again, like the blueprint it works to some extent, but there is a kind of a ceiling that you hit if you're not really like trained and able to consider those people factors. And I really believe and strongly believe that that's an area that IO psychology professionals can really have a profound impact in. And probably need to have more folks out there doing that. That was part of my conversation last night, with my husband was, this is an area that I'm really passionate about. So why not have it as a service offering, and it's something that I hadn't really thought about before, but why not? I
Yeah.
mean, that's an area that both you and I are heavily trained in, not just trained, but also have a lot of experience in. So why wouldn't that be the core piece of what we're doing in our work?
Yeah, well, funny enough, that's the main reason I was attracted to industrial organizational psychology
Mhm.
was the change management for succession planning and leadership development, specifically because I saw small company business owners not dying, but just working through their lives. They didn't take time
Yeah.
off. They couldn't take time off. It was very difficult. They had constant questions because people weren't problem solving, self decision making. Yes, there's a
Mhm.
factor of owners need to give the autonomy to their professionals to do that in their team, but also can the people just do it? And so I was huge on leadership development and succession planning to allow. That's why I focus on small companies, to allow small company business owners to breathe and, have a little bit of freedom in their lives. They don't need to be married to their work. Yes,
Right.
I think we're married to our work, but it's because we love what we do.
Yeah.
And a lot of business owners are like that, but sometimes you need to take a break or else you're going to get burnt.
Yeah.
No, there is one thing I wanted to touch on, kind of rewinding back in our conversation is, you talked about the model and using it, but you need to be moderately flexible in a sense for it. So I
Mhm.
talked about flexi stability.
Yeah.
So about the idea of being flexible but stable at the same time. And us IO professionals, we definitely can help with that, where we know where the flexibility should lie. We know how to deal with those human factors. In fact, I had a conversation with my partner the other night because we're taking a trip soon, and I said you can't pack the day of, because I know you're going to get back, and we have to leave for the airport at the same time that you're going to get back from work. I'm probably going to be waiting for you to go to the airport, knowing him.
Right.
And he goes, "Yeah, I'm just a hard worker. You love me for that." I'm like, "I do love you for that." I'm like, "But you tend to not schedule for the unscheduled. And that is
Right.
something you have to do within succession planning, within mentorship, especially for the fact of you might have a prime candidate, but they might not be ready for the role, or it might show that they're not the person for the role. So you
Right.
need to schedule for the unscheduled. And that's why it's better to have a little bit more time. So a year, I would say, is the absolute minimum amount of time you should have for succession planning.
Oh, I'd say more for sure.
Oh
It's
yeah, that's
funny.
what
My husband does the same thing, just so you know. He packs the day of and it drives me absolutely nuts because then we get there and he's like, "Oh, I forgot toothpaste." I'm like, God.
Yeah, I had that happen actually with a weekend, not a trip we're doing, but it's a weekend race he does. And yeah, he's like, "Did you pack bathroom stuff?" I'm like, "No." I'm like, "I got everything else together. Like, well, all the food and things that sustain human life. He gets all the race stuff together. I
Yeah,
don't know.
right. We'll just have to make
Humans.
sure that they don't listen to this podcast episode. So we'll just hide that from
I don't know
them.
about that. He's subscribed to ours. He's
I'm
trying to
kidding.
learn.
I'm kidding. No, my husband knows that this is true of him most days. So, but yeah, no, not to go into the personal stuff, but yeah, I mean, I think, yeah, like the length of time, right, is so important. And, I've can think of one company in particular that I worked with, and it was interesting because it was a blend of succession planning and a change management, but pretty heavy change management because they, needed a new CEO within the next 2 years. They had 3 people identified internally that they were really interested in. And a part of succession planning that, again, I don't think is always thought about is the development of leaders and the assessment
Yes.
of leaders, right? And like, I'm kind of going all over the place, but a lot of times what I see companies do is pull out the 9 box, for instance. Now, I'm not trashing it or anything like that, but it's more systematic, right? And again, we're humans and there's a lot more complexity to it. So I don't think that my personal opinion, again, is that the 9 box alone is not as effective as looking at kind of the people, for who they are, what they bring to the table, what growth areas they have, all of that, right? So anyway, that's kind of my soapbox. I guess I'll get off of that. But I do think, this company that I was working with, three individuals identified. Obviously, the way that it worked after assessments and coaching and that kind of stuff is they chose one that would take the place in the next 2 years. But that meant that the other 2, I mean, rightfully so, were a little bit disappointed, but also it meant rethinking what their jobs were going to be and what that was going to look like. And so it went from, hey, we need to replace our CEO, to we have a massive organizational structure change, right? And so how do we manage that change? Because all of the people that report into these people need to be informed, right? And informed not just of the change, but the reason and what it's going to look like and all of that. And so I think that's another important part to consider.
Yeah. And I think I love that you brought that up because that's been sitting in the back of my mind of what if you have multiple people?
Mhm.
Someone's going to get disappointed.
Mhm.
And depending on that person, maybe you need to create some other version of a step up for them. You need
Right.
to, value them in a way to make sure that you retain them too, because you could, unfortunately, in choosing a CEO out of 3 people, you could really mind my language, but piss somebody off.
Oh,
You
yeah.
really
Mhm.
and that person could leave the company, and that would cause even worse succession
Mhm.
like, that needs to be done because you have immediacy in that where someone chooses to leave,
Right.
with having it been planned.
Mhm.
Uh, and so you gotta be careful the way you do it within the human factor.
Mhm.
But I do wanna say something is, I don't think we can get into the 9 box now, but I really think we should probably post something about the 9 box
Sure.
because a lot of our listeners probably don't even know what that is.
Yeah.
But I don't think we have time to get into it today. So
No.
keep a look at and keep an eye out on our socials for a little bit of a breakdown of 9 box. Maybe we can post some sort of article to go with it for
Yeah.
more information.
I think that sounds like a great idea. Yeah. And again, I'm not saying it's a bad thing. I think there's a use for it. Um, and it's about how you use it, as with most things in our
Yeah,
world.
and us IOs tend to know how to use it. So that's
Yes.
why we get hired to work with companies.
Absolutely. Yes. No, that's
So
very
you
true.
should learn that and get your own IO knowledge as a company leader. And if you can have your own IO knowledge, maybe you can apply it the way we would. But we are your experts, so if you want help, don't be afraid to reach out to Elizabeth and I or another IO in your friend group.
Absolutely. I think that's a great point. Well, I know we had a really, really amazing 2 last episodes. So I think maybe we cut it shorter today, if
Yeah,
that's okay with you. And we will pick it back up on our next episode next week. So does that sound good to you, Morgan?
yeah, I think it sounds good. We're gonna talk a little bit more about mentorship with you guys, and a couple ways you can do mentorship. So we're gonna get in more to the nitty gritty of it for you next week.
Sounds great. Well, everyone, this concludes another intriguing episode of Organizational Sherlocks. I'm Elizabeth Fleming.
And I'm Morgan Ashworth, reminding you that the journey to success is an ongoing investigation.
Stay curious, stay strategic, and keep utilizing insights to decode your business mysteries.
Join us every Tuesday for your next Who Done It, including next week on Mentorship Breakdowns. This is Organizational Sherlock's closing today's case.
See you all next time.